Hello, everyone, and welcome to 5 ways to troubleshoot faster, boost security, and upsell clients with Auvik TrafficInsights. So let's get into it. What are we going to cover today? Our Director of Systems Engineering, Steve Petryschuk, is diving into Auvik TrafficInsights. Specifically, he's going to be talking about why it's more important than ever to know how the network's being used, not just how it's performing. A little bit about how TrafficInsights goes beyond traditional NetFlow to analyze all traffic flows, even if it's encrypted traffic. When and how you can use TrafficInsights to troubleshoot and boost network security for your clients very fast. How using TrafficInsights as a capacity planning tool can create upsell opportunities for your MSP business. And lastly, as I said, there will be Q&A at the end of the session. And now that that's out of the way, let me introduce your host. Steve Petryschuk is Auvik's Director of Systems Engineering. He spent his 2 years in his role working with both Auvik prospects and current partners, while also lending a hand on the technical side of the company's network management software. He's passionate about helping MSPs grow their businesses, and he leverages his 5 years of experience leading technical enterprise sales and service opportunities in IT security to relate to the challenges and opportunities of the MSP world. He's a regular speaker at many channel events on topics ranging from networking to technical sales, sales enablement, and much more. All right, Steve, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. Much appreciated. I guess to start off, we'll provide a little bit of context. I want to thank everyone for joining. I know we do have a mix of partners and soon-to-be Auvik partners on the call here. So for those a little bit less familiar with Auvik, just a quick rundown of who we are to sort of set the stage for today's discussion. First and foremost, we are network management for MSPs. That is Auvik. We are 100% channel focused, so we focus entirely on working with our MSP and our partners to deliver SMB network management to the world. Being 100% channel focused, we avoid any sort of channel conflict and really work closely with our partners to help deliver that. We are headquartered in Waterloo, Canada, so I know we do have probably a global audience here. We have offices in the UK, an office in Spain, an office in Australia, and have many customers throughout the English-speaking world and many other countries as well. We've grown a lot over the past few years. We currently have over 200 employees spanning those different geographies and over 2,000 different partners in different areas of the world. For those not familiar, that little polar bear on the screen, no, that's not a self-portrait. That is our polar bear mascot. His name is Nanook. Piece of trivia for you for today, if you hadn't learned it before. Nanook simply is an Inuit word for polar bear. So our polar bear is named Polar Bear. We are very creative in that sense. So let's dive into it. To sort of set the stage for today, I want to first talk about why we're talking about Auvik TrafficInsights today. And the reason really is that, today businesses aren't really worrying about the network infrastructure, right? No one's calling you to say, hey, my network's up, running, working. It's just not the case, right? Businesses aren't worried about it because really they have you to manage that network, to help understand how things are connected, configured, performing. That's something that you all manage. So, and that's great, right? You've built a lot of rapport, a lot of business with your clients on sort of helping manage their IT infrastructure and help manage that network for them. The problem really is when things don't go according to plan and when things aren't up. And the reality is that this gateway or this network has become the gateway to everything that they need. Everything has moved to the cloud environment. So now the connection between my endpoints and the network and those applications has become increasingly important. So think about this, right? We used to, in the old days, have a server on site, my workstation was on site, and oftentimes the applications I were using were dedicated on my local machine. So I was using things like Microsoft Word or different desktop-based applications. That's no longer the case. Whether we've taken those applications and moved them to your private data center, to public data centers like AWS or Azure, or leveraging cloud applications like Salesforce or Google Docs or all these things, we've now created this world where we're totally reliant on that network infrastructure, on that connection to the outside world. But this has all been a net benefit, right? There's been revenue opportunities for us in moving them to this cloud environment. There's been uptime and performance improvements for the client. There's usability improvements because they can now leverage those applications anywhere they go. They just have that available to them. So all in all, it's a net benefit, but we have to keep in mind that we've created this now critical link, right? It's that network infrastructure, the glue that sort of holds the endpoints to the applications that has now become this critical link to ensuring uptime, ensuring people are productive. So think about that for a second. If the network was to go down and we get the call from a client, it's normally something along the lines of, hey, the internet's down, or hey, the network's down. They normally don't have too many specifics. But what happens, right? Someone pops out of their desk. We like to call it the gopher effect here. Auvik, someone pops up and says, hey, the network's down. Is your internet down? And it sort of goes on like that. Is yours down? Is yours down? All these heads popping up from cubicles. It creates this very strong awareness and very very quick productivity stopper, right? To basically say, hey, the network is down. I can no longer access those applications that I need to. If we lose the internet for an hour, what's that lost productivity? What is the cost of revenue lost? If I can't access my CRM or my billing details, I can't invoice my clients. Those have real business impacts. I know one client who had network down for 3 hours on a Friday morning. So what does everyone do? They drive into work, internet's down, drive home. All right, they've just lost that whole morning for that time they drove into the office, drove back home, and now we're working from home on a Friday. And we all know what that means at around 3 o'clock on a Friday. I bet there's not a lot of work going on anymore. So now we've lost this whole productive day. And for a large organization, that can really add up pretty quickly. So the network, definitely something that we have to think about, and something that we're really reliant on. And so this network that keeps our business running, it poses a risk, right? And I talked about a little bit of one of those risks, but we're sort of going to focus on two components. The first one is being more of a security risk, right? Understanding how people are using the network, to understand if it's legitimate business purposes, if it's malicious traffic, if someone is using the network to steal data or perform functions that they're not supposed to be. But there's also an operational risk, right? If that network is just down, my business is not productive. I can no longer, invoice my clients, access my CRM, do the daily functions that I'm being paid to do. So to help address these risks, we sort of have to look at two different things, focus on two areas. The first is we have to look at how the network is connected, configured, performing, right? And that's something that the core Auvik platform has long done a really good job to help us understand how things are connected, where people are connected in, how they're performing, how they're configured. But we also have to look as well at how the network is being used. So the topology map is good at showing us how things are connected. A lot of the data that we've been collecting is really good at showing us how much traffic is going through the network. But really part of keeping the network healthy and secure and keeping people productive is ensuring that the network is being used in appropriate ways. So that second part, having insight into what's traveling through the network, we need to start to be able to spot irregularities and ensure that that network is being used properly. So in addition to just monitoring how it's performing, knowing what data is coming into the network, what data is going out of the network, what applications are in use, are extremely important to understand whether there's malicious activity. It's really a whole new meaning to the word monitoring. So by understanding what that traffic is, we can now easily pinpoint the root cause of network issues. So if we start to see a huge spike in bandwidth, we can identify whether it's someone streaming the latest Game of Thrones episode, or if it's a backup of a backup running in the middle of the day, or is it malicious data that's doing, or malicious traffic that's doing something that it shouldn't be. We can see if it's specific IP addresses that are being bandwidth hogs, as opposed to just making guesses and then trying to infer what it might be during that time. So with this information of understanding what that traffic actually is, we can start to reduce the time that it takes to troubleshoot network problems. So that phone call that you get that says, hey, my network is slow or the internet's slow, it's easy to pop in and see exactly what sort of data is traveling through the network and start to take remedial action. You can better protect client sites as well, because you're going to get visibility into all the different packets, where they're going, determining the source and destinations of that traffic. So at this point, you're probably thinking, I've mentioned it a couple of times, why are we talking about this? Auvik traditionally hasn't done that network traffic analytics, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is Auvik TrafficInsights. Traditionally, the Auvik core platform has done a great job of giving you visibility into the network and giving some visibility into how much traffic, how much is going through the network. But TrafficInsights is giving us an entirely new perspective to help understand deeper visibility into what that traffic is. So going beyond the how much to the who is it, what are they doing, where are they going, what applications are they using, and I'm now able to ask a lot more questions of that data to get a clear, comprehensive picture on what is going on in the network. So we'll be able to do things like find and identify bandwidth hogs, the users and machines that are using the most bandwidth on the network. Understand where a network is, or where bottleneck is in the network, not just, hey, is the firewall the bottleneck on the north-south traffic, but if I start to monitor that traffic east-west inside the network, I can start to see if there's internal bottlenecks affecting the performance of this network. Or check to see if someone's connecting into a site on a country that they're not supposed to be. If we have sanctions or banned countries, get some visibility into that type of information. And so that's what Auvik TrafficInsights helps us do. So it starts off as NetFlow at the core, right? So TrafficInsights leverages NetFlow as an input onto our collector. It's already a device sitting on the network. It's already the device doing the monitoring. We basically just have to set up network devices to point NetFlow traffic to that collector. That NetFlow traffic is then further tagged with additional information like GeoIP information and autonomous systems information to help give you more visibility into where that traffic is going and who owns those domains. So we go beyond just that NetFlow traffic by then applying machine learning to these different traffic patterns to understand, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. And if we've seen this type behavior before, then this also, to extend the analogy, this also must be a duck, right? So it's applying that machine learning intelligence on top of the NetFlow data that really extends TrafficInsights beyond just a traditional NetFlow tool and helps enable some of the additional features that we can help you use to improve your networking troubleshooting process. So really the focus here is about making network troubleshooting easier, right? Give you guys the ultimate network monitoring management package to give visibility into how that network is being used. So now with Auvik Core Platform, it'll give visibility into what's on the network, with TrafficInsights, how it's being used to really accelerate the troubleshooting process. And what makes Auvik TrafficInsights different? First, it's about that AI-based application identification, right? So standard NetFlow solutions use port-based identification, and there's a lot of inaccuracies there as we start to identify that so much of the traffic today is, leveraging port 443. And so there's a lot of blind spots that end up existing if we just say, hey, that's all just HTTPS web traffic. Well, it's not, right? A lot of systems are using 443 to then, do other functions. So as much as we can identify what applications are using that port, the better off we are on that troubleshooting process. So that sort of extends to the next point where we can start to get some visibility into what encrypted traffic is. So to say you're always going to see 100% of all encrypted traffic, I think would be misleading. But at some point we have to say, well, we can get more information about what devices are connecting to, what domains those are registered to, what geographies they are in, how that pattern actually looks. Is it a lot of large packets, a lot of small packets, very few large packets? And so what does that traffic pattern look like? Can we use some of that to determine what that application actually is? And that's what TrafficInsights does to help give us visibility into some of that encrypted traffic. Also leveraging geolocation data to help understand, is a distribution of traffic entirely within the country, or is the traffic going to known sanctioned or known malicious countries? And so that kind of thing is not available with every sort of NetFlow solution. So it's something that we can add on with TrafficInsights. Ultimately, we're not diving into the raw flow data every day, but one thing that we enable you to do is now, if we have a specific investigation or specific need, using Auvik TrafficInsights to dive into detailed forensics into every single traffic flow, either coming from a device or going to an entire network, allows us to pinpoint exactly what happened with that device and with other devices on that network, maybe during an infection. The UI is probably one of the best ones that we've gotten a lot of feedback from partners where it says this is the best user interface I've seen for NetFlow data, because we allow you to basically do quick and easy searching and filtering on that NetFlow data so you can quickly pinpoint the who, what, where. And so it's that complete and intuitive search that really is accelerating that troubleshooting process. And of course, we wouldn't be built for the channel if Auvik TrafficInsights wasn't multi-tenanted. So again, multi-tenancy built at the core, and the core Auvik platform, that's true of TrafficInsights as well. We are making that multi-tenancy available to our MSCP partners, which isn't the case in many traditional NetFlow solutions. And finally, we integrate into the Auvik core platform. Surprise, surprise, right? Auvik TrafficInsights integrating with Auvik, but we sort of bridge those two gaps by giving visibility into host names and then where they're connected into to really help accelerate that answer. Once I find, say, an IP address or a host that's causing an issue, where are they connected? How are they, actually connected back into the network, and really help pinpoint that side of things really quickly. So let's dive into it a little bit and let's understand how we can use Auvik TrafficInsights in some real world situations here to help with some of the troubleshooting situations that you and your teams face day to day. The real question is, how much time and how much, ultimately money can we save by using this, and how much quicker can we get those issues solved? So we'll see how to identify anomalous behaviors in visual plots. We'll look at network traffic peaks, device or assets talk to unexpected locations, And we'll then relate that back to the Auvik core platform as well to help with some of the discovery as well. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is sort of our case of the lunchtime network pig. And I always like the visual that comes up here because it's definitely sort of brings that network pig out there. So think about this for a second. You get that client that calls and says, hey, every day at noon, my network stops, substitute noon for whatever time of day. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, things just slow down. The network grinds to a halt. Traditionally, we're going on site with, say, enterprise tools. We're setting up packet captures, maybe using a TCP dump on Wireshark, and start to analyze that traffic and hope that it happens again that day. Now, if it's repetitive and it does happen every day, that's really beneficial. But what if it's not happening every day or it's intermittent? We now may waste many truck rolls and many hours on site trying to reproduce a specific issue. With Auvik TrafficInsights, we're going to dive in and help us troubleshoot that a lot faster without having to send someone on site, and then using the Auvik core platform, really identify where that user is connected back in and start to take remedial action. So what does that look like? Well, first I'm going to launch our TrafficInsights dashboard. So by diving into one of the devices on my network, I can launch the TrafficInsights dashboard to start to get some of that visibility into that data. So I mentioned, something over the noon hour, sort of that network grinding to a halt at noon. What I can quickly do is highlight that time period here down in the bottom time period selector section of the TrafficInsights dashboard. So a lot of stuff loading up here, but if I highlight the noon period, I can quickly see all the traffic that's happening over that lunch hour. In this case, we see that there's this big spike in encrypted traffic. I mentioned earlier we strive to identify everything, but in this case we haven't. Let's dive into that to figure out, well, what's going on? Why is that spike of traffic happening right around the lunch hour? So I'll dive into that application type, and all my charts, all my graphs will focus in on just the encrypted traffic that I can see up here in the corner. So sure enough, it is primarily SSL encrypted traffic, but who is it? What are they doing? Where are they going? I can then pivot on that data using the top end view to understand what are all the sources, what are all the destinations, and what are the top conversations. And drilling in here, we can see this top conversation really is between a device called localhost and then the specific IP that I don't quite know that host name. So the obvious question then is, who is it? And is this legitimate business traffic? So by pivoting on that data back into the Auvik core dashboard, I can quickly look for that host, local host device here, and find out that sure enough, it is an ESX server on my network. Diving into that device, I could see what sorts of VMs are running on it, how that traffic pattern sort of looks on that host itself. I can also look for the other end of the culprit, the other culprit. So who is the other member of that conversation, and find this specific IP address, figure out that they're connected into port 5040 on my core switch. So now I know exactly where they're connected. If it's identified as malicious, I can take remedial action, maybe something as extreme as pulling the plug. Not saying we necessarily have to go that far, but at least I can jump into my endpoint RMM tools, do further debugging on that device. But quickly, within 2 minutes, I'm able to identify what assets were involved in that communication, what type of traffic it is, and where they're connected back in to start to take that remedial action. The next use case we'll sort of talk about is what we like to call sort of the case of the surprise growth spurt. And so this is one of those cases where we have to start to look at capacity planning and how is that network actually being used. So we've all had that instance where the network is at peak capacity, right? If we have 100 megabit per second link and that's been all that's committed by the ISP, and the end client maxes out that link on a regular basis. So before, Auvik was able to tell us how much, right? We knew that it was full. We knew that they were pushing 100 megabits per second. But what is that traffic? Is it legitimate business traffic, right? What are the remedial actions that I can take to help improve the experience for the end client? So ultimately, I have to answer the question, is that legitimate business traffic? Is that something that is required to go through that network? Or is it something that's not legitimate business traffic? Is it something like someone streaming the Game of Thrones episode? I mentioned that earlier. I seem to pick on Game of Thrones a lot. I think we put this together around the time that the last episode was coming out. But now we have to answer that question quickly, and we want to be able to quickly identify which one of these it is. Because if it is legitimate business traffic, we have a bit of an upsell opportunity to say, hey, we have this internet full pipe, right? Maybe there's different services that you offer that you can offer them more bandwidth, or sort of create a revenue opportunity out of that. Ultimately, there's a net benefit in it for you, generate some more revenue, and there's a net benefit in it for the client as well to improve performance and improve connectivity. But if it's not legitimate business traffic, we need to quickly identify what that is, jump into the endpoint and shut that down. Or if it's something that is a banned application, make sure it's stopped. If it's something that's just against the acceptable use policy, we can coach the users towards better use of that network. So diving into what that looks like within the Auvik TrafficInsights dashboard, I can dive into a specific time frame. Maybe it's 2 to 4 in the afternoon. If this is, I don't have a situation in this case where my internet is actually peaked out, so it's a little bit tougher to demonstrate, but there's a fairly consistent encrypted traffic load here. So what is that traffic, and who is using it? What are they doing? Is it legitimate business traffic? I can pick on that specific traffic category and again, dive deeper into that traffic, right? What I might then do is pivot on that again to see who is using that application. In this case, we have a number of different IP addresses. There's no single conversation as compared to before where there's one single conversation that stood out and say, hey, this ESX host was my culprit that was producing a lot of traffic. In this case, I have many different IP addresses talking to many different sources and destinations. If we start looking at some of the actual sources, we have things like Google Video. Well, we use YouTube a lot at work. We have things like Facebook. We have a team that does marketing on Facebook. These are all legitimate business functions. So it's very likely that this is, with the exception of the Spotify down here, it's very likely there's a lot of legitimate business traffic. Now I can start to identify, hey, we have a full internet pipe. It's a variety of users. It's all legitimate business traffic. We need to start to put together a plan to budget with the client, to put together some strategic guidance so that as this customer continues to grow and they continue to use more of their capacity, that we are continuing to support them in that growth, that they're able to sort of plan appropriately. We don't want to be in a situation where we're going, hey, you've been at your max bandwidth for the past 3 months, we should probably upgrade yesterday. We want to be providing that strategic guidance saying, hey, it looks like things have been getting busier over time. It all seems to be legitimate business traffic. Let's put together a plan to help you upgrade in a timely fashion here. So next one I'll dive into is the case of that banned but used application, right? So it's that call from the client that sort of says, hey, I got this letter from the Motion Picture Authority, and someone's been downloading movies on my network. I don't know who it is. Or you see that there's applications in use, like something like Dropbox or other file share applications. These things, they may be okay on some client networks, but others clients may have a stringent acceptable use policy that explicitly prohibits the use of these applications. So understanding what sorts of applications people are being used and being able to identify who that person is quickly helps us to build that client trust and build that rapport with the client, and then quickly remediate issues that, if they shouldn't be using those applications or if they are against the acceptable use policy. So whether it's encrypted or not, getting some visibility into what applications are in use, what devices people are talking to, is very valuable in that troubleshooting process. So very similar workflow. Just dive back into the TrafficInsights dashboard here and get back out a couple of filters that I had. And I'm going to start off on this applications view to get a quick insight into what sorts of applications are in use on my network. If I was to pick on one of those potentially banned applications, we could look at something like Dropbox. So if I pick on my file transfer application, I can then look at all the different file transfer protocols in use. A little bit of FTP data in my network, but there's a lot of Dropbox here on the network as well. By clicking in on that, again, I can narrow in on the data, just how much data is being transmitted over Dropbox. We can see here on average it's about 2.7 kilobits per second, which isn't a lot, but over time that can add up. So by using these 3 dots up in the corner, I can pivot on that data to understand not just how much traffic over time, but how much total traffic. And here we can see the file transfer traffic is about 59 megabytes or 58.7 over the past day and a half. Again, still fairly insignificant, but that data does add up over time. If I start seeing gigs of data being transferred over Dropbox, I'm starting to raise red flags here. What am I going to do about that? So the obvious question there is, who is it? What are they doing? Is it legitimate? Right? If we pivot on that data again to that top end view, really understand what users are consuming this Dropbox content. We see that there are a couple of key users, one specific IP address 40.166, and then a couple of users inside the network. So if I wanted to focus in on that one user, I could drill into this dashboard, into the Auvik dashboard, click in that device, find out exactly where they're connected. And unfortunately, this device is offline right now. And so this is probably someone that was at our office yesterday, transmitting a lot of files, not there today. So not able to track down connected, but I'm able to see exactly what user that is. I'm going to then look at my endpoint RMM and say, well, which device is this that owns that IP? What user is it? And continue the investigation that way. Well, so the next use case we'll sort of focus on is what we sort of call the case of the globe-trotting traffic. And what this really refers to is taking a look at what sort of traffic is going to what sorts of geographies across the world. So using the geolocation map within Traffic Insights, we can start to get visibility both for ourselves and for the end clients into where exactly traffic is going. And this is one of those things very similar to the Auvik topology map that's also very useful in that sales process as well. So if you're looking to onboard a new client or you're looking to upsell a current client on managed network services, giving visibility into how that traffic is being used via this topology is pretty eye-opening for some clients. Now, what we're going to be able to do is highlight some countries that may be explicitly off limits, like if there's sanctioned countries that you're not allowed to do any business with, or if there's countries that you think are a known threat and you want to sort of put in some geo restriction rules on the firewall, using Traffic Insights to identify where traffic is going and then determining whether it's business critical allows us to sort of take a phased approach where we don't just say, hey, block everything that's leaving the country. We can take a look at what those applications are, understand whether they're business critical or not, and then start to put some policies into place to determine if people are allowed to talk to some of these specific geographies. So I'll focus in on the geolocation map here within Auvik Traffic Insights, and you can see immediately using this as part of that sales process is really valuable to start to show some of the clients the type of information that you're able to glean on their network. A number of people have probably seen this via their firewall dashboard or something before, and it's very valuable to show this information to a client and say, hey, look at where all your traffic is going. Do you have business dealings in Poland, in Russia, in China? If not, why is their data going there? I mean, the internet is fully connected across the globe, so it's not unusual to have traffic to some of these countries, but if there's no legitimate business need to have traffic flow in those countries, maybe we'll take remedial action within that firewall rule base. So if we start on this geographic map, it's now we have to figure out, well, what is this traffic? Is it legitimate? Is there a business purpose to this traffic? So we can start to select one of these countries. Maybe I'll pick on Russia for a second because it was there, right? So if we were to select Russia, now I want to understand, well, not just how much data is going to Russia, but what type of data? Who is using it? Is it legitimate business? Is it personal data? Should this be happening on the network? Ultimately, some of that is policy decisions that you and the client get to determine, but getting that visibility is the first step in the process here. So we can quickly pivot into the applications to understand what types of applications are in use. Not surprisingly, a lot of it is encrypted. All right, so now I want to understand, well, who is it and where are they going and what is this encrypted traffic? Should I be concerned? So I can pivot again into this top-end view to see what types of users are accessing this data. In this case, we have a 3dnews.ru and a mail server in Russia. So these are probably legitimate personal things to be using because there's a couple of users here who are accessing it on their iPhones. So now we face a policy decision. Do we block this completely or update the acceptable use policy to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be accessing this at work? This is ultimately something that you and the client get to decide, but having that visibility is the first piece of that puzzle, right? In this case, we're not overly concerned. It's just, a news site, and given the names of the users, it makes sense that they're accessing, Russian news sites. If I want to then dive into all the raw flows as well, we can do that. But I'll dive into our last use case here to really talk about that flow data as well to understand exactly all the, total number of bytes and what sorts of flows are traversing that network. And that's going to focus on what we call the case of the infected device. So it's that old, you get an alert from your antivirus or a call from a client that says, hey, my device is infected, or, I've gotten that, crypto locker screen, or I've gotten, some indication that a device has been compromised. So one of the things that sort of comes to my mind is, if I have one device infected, how large is that blast radius? What else happened on the network? What else is infected, right? We can remediate this one machine, but if I just remediate that one machine and the other devices are infected on the network, then I'm no further ahead than I was a few minutes before. So anyone on the call who's ever done any ethical hacking, or maybe not so ethical, hopefully it was more on the ethical side, knows that the first thing you do in when you start to infect a network is you spend a lot of time on discovery, right? It's basically that land and expand kind of approach. You want to do as much recon as you can because you've worked hard to get that one asset and you want to remain sticky. So you start scanning assets, you see what's out there, you see, do you want to, is the user or is a malicious actor trying to access the domain controller or another workstation? If this client still has some servers on site, if they have local applications or local databases, do you see that this malicious device was pulling a whole bunch of traffic from the SQL server? What other devices might this asset have been talking to? It becomes a really important question because we want to start understanding that blast radius. How big is this infection problem? So we can use the Traffic Insights dashboard to actually drill into some of that information. So if we start in on this sort of top-end view, I can add some filters in to start to understand, what specific asset was infected and what internal device it was talking to. So if I was to pick a specific device, say for example, my 40.150 device was the one that was infected, I can quickly apply that as a search and see everything that this infected device was talking to. If we look externally, there's a lot of external devices, some Zoom, some Google. These are all business applications, so this is all legitimate. But what else was that infected device doing inside the network? Well, now I'm going to edit that filter. I'm going to basically say, knowing my IP address scheme here, I'm going to look for any other internal networks that this device was talking to. And I quickly filter on that data and see every single asset that this potentially infected device was talking to. Turns out that there's, a lot of these Auvik virtual appliances, and given that, this is the lab environment, that's not surprising there's a lot of VMs. So the question then becomes, is this legitimate, or is this, something that I should be concerned about? I can then pivot on that data back into the applications and protocols view to see what sorts of applications were in use without necessarily having to dive into that raw flow data yet. So highlighting the different applications here, I'll see, are they using encrypted traffic? Is it all ping traffic? Is it SNMP? Is it, unencrypted web traffic? Being able to answer that question, what that traffic is again, really important in this case. And I think my session may have just timed out here as we're on a call. So that, it's always good demo when there's a demo fail somewhere along the way, right? So let's just drop those filters back in here. And quickly see, given these filters, that it's actually a lot of this others traffic, right? So I can drill into that traffic and see all the different data that this specific device was talking to on these internal networks. Sure enough, it was a lot of ping traffic, a lot of SNMP. Maybe I'm a little bit worried if this device is doing SNMP. Given it's our lab network, I'm not concerned, but I can drop right down into that flow data to see exactly all the different devices, all the different traffic patterns, all the different sources and destinations that the device was talking to. Just by clicking the search button, we're going to leverage these filters, and it's going to bring back the first 1,000 flows of all the raw data. I can then get more granular to identify, what other flows may be sort of in play here. I can get more than those 1,000 flows if I want to look at different search parameters, different filter parameters. But quickly, scanning this list, I see sure enough there's a lot of ICMP and SNMP traffic, so I'm not super concerned. But understanding exactly what this device connected to across the entire network for that period that was infected now gets me one step further, so I can answer that client question. What did this device talk to? How big is the problem? How broad is that blast radius? I now know exactly what that infected asset was doing and for how long it was doing it. So those are the core use cases that we definitely wanted to cover today. I know we had built in some time for questions here, so definitely want to open the lines up to questions, and hopefully Sarah can jump in a second with those. But before we get to that, I'll mention this again at the end. Couple sort of calls to action here as we sort of approach the latter half of the Q&A session of the webinar. If you're not already an Auvik partner, we definitely want you to take this for a spin for yourself. So you can book a demo using this code on the screen, auvik.com/trafficinsights19, get a $5 Starbucks gift card when you do book that demo. And existing Auvik partners, if you're not currently leveraging Auvik Traffic Insights, talk to your partner success manager, and you can get more information on rolling it out to a couple of clients and start to get some of that visibility and to answer some of these questions. So with that, let's jump into the Q&A period.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. And you used my my favorite method of troubleshooting, just hitting the refresh button, since I'm not exactly a very technical person either, so that's awesome. So Rick's wondering today, when will SFlow be supported in Traffic Insights?
That is a great question. So SFlow is currently in a private beta program. So we do have it working on a number of client sites here. We're just working through the late stages of that private beta, hoping to open it up to a public beta soon, although I can't commit to a specific timeline.
Perfect. And Jeremiah is wondering, are there any plans to allow for forwarding into an SIEM platform from TrafficInsights?
So direct integration into SIM platforms is not something on the short-term horizon, although I can definitely see a use case for that, being able to alert on specific incidents and events. One thing that you have seen as sort of a theme for Auvik for this year is exposing a lot of our data via APIs. So starting off with our inventory API and alert history API, I would expect that you'll see some more API development on the TrafficInsights and other fronts over the coming months. And so leveraging those APIs, I can see a lot of our partners starting to build their own integrations into third-party platforms as well.
Awesome. And Eric was wondering why your session dropped. Is it just because the session timed out in TrafficInsights?
It did, yeah. Timed out in TrafficInsights. So we do have a session timeout limit, and that was recently changed. I believe it's 15 minutes of time, but that's something that I can follow up on.
Okay, cool.
Always a good user experience, right, when something drops out mid-demo.
Keeping them honest, Eric, I like it. That's awesome. And Jared's wondering where on the network this should be enabled on each of the internal VLANs and WAN interfaces, for example.
Yeah, so my approach is really as much visibility as we can get into the network, the better, right? So we talk a little bit, I mentioned a couple times north, south, and east-west traffic. So the first place I'm always going to deploy it is on that external facing device, so I can start to get visibility into the north-south traffic to understand what's coming from and what's leaving the network. But really a lot of the internal troubleshooting capabilities come when I start enabling flow visibility into internal devices. So if we have different switches or different layer 3 devices like routers within the network, any place that I can enable it, we should, to help understand how things are flowing east-west within the network. So you start talking about that inside, potentially infected device talking to other assets within the network, I need to have that east-west internal visibility. So it's that first switch that asset's connected into. I want to start to enable flow on those devices as well.
Perfect. And he had a follow-up to that question as well, Steve. He's just wondering, are there any performance implications for the collector with the amount of increased data from NetFlow with TrafficInsights?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our collector is a fairly lightweight piece of software. If you're using the Windows one, it's sort of a 10 megabyte download. The virtual appliance is a little bit beefier with that operating system that has to run. But really, there's no plans to make that collector beefier at this point. What we're basically doing with that collector is collecting that data and sending it up to the cloud for processing. So it compresses and encrypts that data before sending it off. So there's no minimal overhead on the collector device itself. A lot of that data processing is done in the cloud. So short term, I don't see any need to get a beefier collector.
Perfect. And Scott shared that he set TrafficInsights up on the inside interface on his firewall. Is that the correct place to put it?
I would say yes. So in most cases, your firewall ends up doing some sort of NAT from the internal IP space to the external IP space. What we want to do is we want to capture that flow data before it's actually gone, basically pre-NAT, right? So before it's translated to the outside IP or the public IP. Setting it up on the inside interface typically gives that visibility. So I would say at least 9 times out of 10, that's the first place I would set it up.
Awesome. And Eric had a follow-up as well. Can you get info on an encrypted flow if you have the key to the encryption?
Good question. So what we're basically doing with TrafficInsights is we're collecting NetFlow data, which basically gives us metadata about the traffic. So it's basically, rather than saying there's a blue and a red car driving down the road, it's telling us, hey, there was 2 cars driving down the road. So what we're basically going to understand is that there is encrypted traffic, and then we apply some of our machine learning as well as those other additional information that we tag that traffic with to understand what that encrypted traffic is. So we're actually not storing the encrypted traffic itself. For that, you'd be looking at something more like a deep packet inspection or DPI tool. And for the most part, those are something that aren't necessarily within a typical SMB network. They tend to get pretty expensive, need to sit in line. So we don't have a DPI built in. Therefore, we're not maintaining that full database of all the encrypted traffic.
Awesome. And those are all the questions from the group, but oh, sorry, one just popped up. Is there a way to get host names as opposed to IP addresses? Michael's wondering.
Yeah, great question. So the information about host names and IP addresses within the Traffic Insights dashboard actually come from the core Auvik product. So the more discovery that we've done within the core Auvik product, the better the quality of the names that are in here. So for example, if I have a host name within the Auvik platform, that host name is going to populate in this dashboard instead of the IP address. So as much as possible, you'll see host name. Now, unfortunately, I have a network where we don't have host name discovery on a lot of assets. So you can see a couple in here, like this device down here, and a couple external devices that have host names resolved. For the most part, in most of our client environments, you will see those host names the IP addresses being resolved to host names based on that Auvik discovery data.
Beautiful. And I'm going to throw you a little curveball here. Oh, no, not yet. Almost time for the curveball. Jordan's wondering, on the host name note, does the collector do a name lookup on the IP, or does Auvik have to have the host name known on the device?
So it would be through the Auvik discovery that we collect that host name. So we collect host names from a number of different ways, either directly from the device via discovery service like SNMP or WMI or whatever other discovery services we're using. We use the Windows SMB file and print sharing protocol to collect host names as well. So as long as we have that host name through one of our discovery methods, we'll show it within the Traffic Insights dashboard.
Beautiful. And John is wondering, is there a way to get something that looks like top N but with all devices?
With all devices, so see every single device that is in the network. I can get more visibility into the sort of the top 25, top 15 if I want to expand that list out to more devices. I'm just trying to think of how I might architect it to show every single IP. I might be able to via the raw flows data. Just thinking be interesting question back to what would be the use case that I want to see every single IP sort of stack ranked. I might want to dive into what an IP is doing or what an IP is talking to, and for that I might start to use the filters or the searches here. I'm just trying to figure out why I would need to see every single IP stack ranked.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to throw you that little mini curveball. I was chatting with one of our partners in the chat here, and he mentioned he's using Traffic Insights on their internal network to see what traffic is flowing and to identify any security issues. Is that something that we see a lot of partners doing, Steve, or is there a use case for that you can see?
Yes, we talked a little bit earlier about north, south, and east-west traffic. There's definitely a lot of partners that are starting to get more visibility into the internal traffic in the network, so what different assets are talking to. Normally when there's a security risk, there is some sort of external communication as well, so I'd be looking at both the north-south and the east-west traffic to understand what is that device talking to internally, and then who is it talking to externally. But yeah, it's definitely something that we can start to look at if we've enabled those flow protocols on different devices within the network. We can see all that internal traffic as well to help pinpoint what a specific asset has been talking to.
Awesome. I think that covers all the questions that we had today, Steve. I just want to call out, I did post in the chat as well. We have a LinkedIn community that's called Frankly MSP, and it's an unbiased place for MSPs to chat with each other with questions, looking for advice from peers. So I would encourage you to join. I run that community as well. So after today, if you want to continue the conversation, please join up and we'll get going on that.